video over here.
No worries, no worries.
Okay. Yeah, so there's two things. The first one is there's a certain spaciousness that I'm naturally really good at being able to pursue and follow. And the second one is that I'm using that to create what I call a systems-based approach to conversations, to health, and in general. And so what I naturally do is I teach people systems, because I believe if they understand system science, then not only do their own lives become more apparent to them, but they can't be enslaved by all sorts of bullshit that naturally orbits our fields, orbits the space that we embody and that we're in.
I love your choice of language. It's very I don't want to say peculiar, because I don't feel like that justifies the word. It's like it's very interesting, but there's a better word for what I'm trying to come up with. It escapes me right now. But I love your language. That's what I was also wanted to ask you about when you mean like teaching of like systems. What do you mean by that? Like when you talked last time, how you're like bringing up the structures and everything. And again, like when you messaged me about like the whole oatmeal thing and like how that caused fermentation with fruit, let me tell you, man, the moment I stopped adding fucking fruit to my oatmeal, I don't burp anymore. I sat there and I'm like, was it seriously like that tiny difference changed everything? But it's also another thing I learned too is for me, my body, I like to, after I take my elixir, I find eating fruit first helps everything just go down together, as towards where I'd leave fruit last and I'd already feel like, geez, now I gotta finish the fruit. I don't even know if I have space for it. But if I eat it first, my stomach's like, yeah, put everything down first. And I'm assuming that's because of the sugars and everything, making the stomach be like, okay, well, put some more food in here. We're ready. Yeah. I wanted to thank you for that. That changed the game, man.
No, I'm really glad. Yeah, I look at the stomach as it's a bag, and if we mix certain things in that bag, then they don't always go well together. I was giving an example to a good friend of mine just yesterday. We were picking some mulberries. And besides me making my own mulberry jam very recently, which I liked, it was very good. Also, one of the things that I was mentioning was that if you take something like meat, just as an example, something like beef, a cow can take 2 days to digest, even cooked inside of the stomach, inside of that bag. So if we take that bag and we put something like that in there, then we take some space and we put, even if it's like, just right after we throw in some fruit, well, that fruit might take anywhere from 1 to 2 to 3 hours to digest. The meat's taking 3 days. We put them in the same bag, and now the fruit is being delayed because of the consumption of the flesh. So, you also mentioned my use of words. I was just complimented like 20 minutes before you came in, that the way that I word things makes him think. Good friend of mine, that it makes him think. And I think that has to do because I'm very present, and I embody a certain space in the moment right now, right here. I keep a certain atmosphere, and even right now, I see a field around you, and I'm staying inside of that field in myself. And so I feel like a witness to myself talking, which is always very interesting for me to experience and to be part of.
Yeah, like you are definitely very aware. Like when I talk to you, I can instantly my awareness just instantly picks up on. I'm like, wow, he's very aware of himself. He is very, very aware of his words that he chooses, of himself, of his presence, of his function. Like it's very evident to me that you're extremely hyper aware. I like that because it helps me. Like when I hear you talk, it helps me pick up on some of the things that I'm not particularly aware of until I start talking to you, and then you'll say something with your choice of language, and I'll be like, wow, I wasn't actually aware of that before. Of that, like I wasn't even aware of like how the gas hit my system and everything before. Like I wasn't even aware of like the fermentation and like the burping being due to like the oatmeal and the fruits until like you said that. And after I was eating, I was like, I am actually like bloated a little bit, but I didn't even notice that till we finished that conversation. And I'm like, wow, really? That's like how it really is. Sorry, I'm just gonna grab my coffee real quick.
Okay.
But another thing I wanted to ask you too, what do you think about dry fruit and regular fruit together? Do you feel like that's something you should do? Would that be a bad thing to do since they're both fruits, but one's dry and one's like normal? And I guess I'll give the example of like mixing like dried dates with like a banana, like eating both of those. Would you say that would cause any issues for the gut?
Do you feel like you're becoming more aware over time?
Yeah, like when it comes to like my gut now. Sorry, I was walking. I don't know if you heard me. When it comes to like my gut, I have definitely like I've noticed throughout this regimen that when I feel good, which is particularly every day now, unless like I do a very strenuous like workout exercise and then I'm just like sore and I'm like, okay, I just need to relax today. But I find when I like when you're in a good mood, everything about you, like all your cells feel good, so you feel good. I find I'm more aware, which gives me more choice to like instead of being like for an example, like somebody would say something that would usually tick you off, but since you're feeling good, it's like it doesn't bother you because you're aware, you like you feel good. You're just like, oh, that would bother me, but I'm deciding not to. Like I've just found through like fasting and like eating like this, like how much like when my gut and my whole system is working well, like a lot of things just don't bother you in life, you know, like passive aggressiveness, people's negativity, racism. Maybe like you have a brother or sister that you argue with. Like with me, I have like an older sister and little sister. And when they argue back in the day when they used to argue with me, I'd get upset. And then I'm just like, you know what? I love you guys. And I just walk away instead of just engaging in some 5 minute argument that's like pointless.
Yeah, so I personally don't include wet fruit with my dry fruit. Um,
Oh, okay.
I find it for me it's not a good combination. The wet fruit will digest the fastest, and dry fruit can digest pretty quickly too. But
Yeah.
because of the water content inside of the wet fruit, it can take up space in someone who fasts as long as you or I may. Um,
Hmm.
but also and space inside of that bag, but also the wet fruit, uh, it ferments faster.
Oh, okay. See,
Yeah.
like this is awesome. Like speaking to the doctor and everything, like unfortunately for me, I haven't got all of his updated texts. Like since I when I moved, I unfortunately lost majority of like my books, so I was a little disappointed with that. But it is what it is. And now that he's increased the price and everything, like he's a nice man, so he's helping me out. So I just owe him a few more dollars. But it's like I'm slowly catching up to like the updated stuff that he's talking about. So I just feel a little behind with you guys. So that's why like I'd bug you guys sometimes. I'm like, Jesus Christ, I need to catch up. Everybody's so far ahead of me right now. And it's you know how you like you watch like I believe last time we chatted we talked about like impact theory, right? Like a little bit of impact theory. You said you've seen like some episodes of whatnot of impact theory. But anyways, the reason I bring it up is all these doctors and scientists that Tom Bilyeu brings on, it just feels like Noon is so far ahead of them because when they talk, I'm just like, this was already like I already know this stuff, but they're bringing this up like it's something new, like they just figured this out, and you have the doctor like, no, we've been doing this for so long now. Like it just feels like science or like our nutrition is like so outdated by like these experts that it's really hard for people to actually understand what to eat and how to eat and actually live like a regular lifestyle. Like when you eat throughout the day, you become so complacent. You just become so lazy. You just don't want to do anything. At least I've noticed if I ever, I don't know when I've really broken a fast. It's been a while, but I noticed if I ever did and I would just eat throughout the day, I'm like, man, I'm not even motivated. Like I could just find so many excuses not to work out, not to just do responsibilities, not to do anything. And I sit there and meditate. I'm like, is this really because I just ate? Like, is it literally because I just ate that I just decided to just forego these responsibilities? Like, I don't know. Like, have you ever noticed that with yourself? If you've ever like, if you've broken a fast or just ate throughout the day, how much less you're more willing to do things?
So there are, let's say that the body is a system and it's composed of all these dots. Let's say
Okay.
that it's all being held together by a string. I'm a cobweb held together by a center.
Okay.
Each dot in that center is a telephone pole that connects to every other center. This is the neurons. This is a system of neurons. Each axon connects to every other one. Now,
Okay.
the oscillations or the frequency that these share energy with, share light to the other cells. Light is transferring through this cobweb. It's moving at the rate that it moves. If I can slow that down, then I can have more even activity throughout the body. Now,
Okay.
by keeping a certain time to eat, what you're doing is optimizing the circadian rhythm, the rhythm of this cobweb to share light from one end to the other end. And the system is a clock, and it also has certain times that are pre-programmed for many generations.
I got a question. That's so interesting. I love it. Again, your language with the cobwebs and stuff. I'm like, Jesus, the way that you look at the body, it's just like it's so cool. I'm just like my imagination is instantly just like picturing this. I'm like, that's a really fucking awesome way to look at it. I love it. But so I got a question, like being metabolically, like, do you think like being metabolically flexible is like something that should be worked on? Like I think about it sometimes, like going back to like the circadian rhythm, like for me, I like to work out around 6:30, and then I eat around 8 p.m. and I'm usually in bed by 10. And then like I was just thinking like being like metabolically flexible, like being able to eat at certain times or work out at certain times. Do you think it's a disadvantage to be eating and working out at the same times every single day, or do you feel like being metabolically flexible may have an advantage with throughout our lifestyles?
So I feel like because of what I do, on the outside, it may look like I'm, let's say, becoming very rigid. But when my apartment exploded on the 18th of February, that wasn't the case. Not only was my mind very flexible and prepared for change, but my body was very flexible and prepared to change. What we practice is putting the body under stress. We may practice it in a very methodical way, but that way is optimized to our circadian rhythm. People aren't aware that there is a natural circadian rhythm in the body. If we learn how to apply stress to that cobweb, the strings themselves become thicker over time. And what that does is allow a certain resilience to adapt to change when change comes.
I like that. I like that a lot. That's awesome, man. Like I love it, man. Like when I talk to you, I'm like, this guy answers your questions, but in a like such a simplistic way that it's like you don't like when you answer a question, it's like you like I understand it. Like I just feel like it's just very helpful and it actually like hits home to what I'm talking about. So thank you. It's very informative. Like I like to I guess the best way it is, I like to learn a little about a lot. Like I'm always just like going into different areas. I was like, and I'm like, all right, I like that. I'm taking that. I'm taking that. Like the best way to describe it, like advice is free. You know, you take what you want, discard the rest. At least that's how I choose to live my life. So I'm always just very interested of just like learning about something and then like moving on because that's just who I am. I find at least for me, if I don't like I like to learn about different things, but I don't like to stay in the same thing because I just kind of get bored. I'm like, okay, I need something else to entertain me. And I think that might just be from like my ADD. But yeah. Going back to like you were talking about like your podcast, like what did you want to like do from it? Like what's the
So,
aims or goals?
so that's perfect. It aligns with this extension of what you're saying, which is it makes you a perfect student for systems theory, because you're saying is that you want to understand everything. You want to understand the universe itself, and there's a science to everything. If I learned the science to a backflip, I learned the science to politics, and they're the exact same thing if you break them
Yep,
down on a metaphysical
yep,
level. And so
yeah.
what I teach and also what I'm involved in is understanding system science, and I teach system science through understanding the body. So that way it remains very grounded. And how did I get introduced to that? I got introduced to that through Noon, inadvertently through the process that me and you practice. I was intuitively learning system science before I had the language to make those associations. Not only being so attuned and in love with language did I start to make my own, but also in being exposed to other brilliant people who have similar names to him, Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, for example, who taught me systems, I was able to go into this underground college, so to speak, and start learning the systems of systems, which is a science of understanding the body as a system. And his grandmother, Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, was able to look at someone's face and know what kind of person they were when it came to the condition of their body. And we know that in traditional Chinese medicine, we know that in Ayurveda, but we also know this in the Sankhya philosophy, and even deeper in what we practice. And so the body is a system, and it's a metaphysical, as above, so below. And that goes even deeper than we even give that credit for. Once the brain, the mind itself works this way, as above, so below, as it becomes more and more specialized in being able to identify systems, it becomes more and more adept and perfect at making out these associations. These associations are the same patterns that have to do with everything else. And so, and it has to do with the fundamental sounds of the universe. It has to do with the way every single religion has explained consciousness inside of these narrative forms, so that way the message isn't lost. And what people often say to one another, whether or not they're aware that they're practicing systems, when people talk about energy, they're usually talking about the substructure instead of the actual energy that goes in between things, because energy itself is actually a secret. But the structure is what we're usually pointing out when we say, I like your energy. What people were saying is, I like your structure. Though your structure shows that you're moving energy in a way that interests me. Thank you. This is what people often mean. Energy itself is a secret that we can only sense. And what this secret is conversion. Conversion is the second out of these three principles. The second out of these three principles converts into 5. Those 5 turn into 9. Those 9 turn into 144. And Ayurvedic science, or the science of engineering, have known this for upwards of 5,000 years. And I would say older if we look at the Egyptian pyramids.
Jesus Christ, man, that's so fucking cool. Like, that is so interesting. Like, you just sort of like blew my mind there for a second, like with the whole, like specifically with like the whole energy being a secret thing and going through the structure. And I'm just like, that makes a lot more fucking sense. Like, that makes, the way you just described it, I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. Like that hits home. That's cool, man. That's fucking awesome. I love it. Like this whole like systems of like structures and everything. Like, that's why I specifically really wanted to talk to you about it, because I'm really interested in that. I'm like looking at the body more of in like a new way than like how, I guess, like, I don't want to like bash people and say like it's just like experts that sound like they don't know what they're talking about, but it's like
You're right. You're right, because many experts, a majority of the system that we use over here in this part of the world, the West, instead of operating in systems, they operate in reductionism. They reduce it to a single cause. And so, for example, if something happens to my toe, they don't associate, or let's say something happens to my knees, I'll have to see 3 different doctors, because there's a specialist for the knee, there's one for the ankle, one for the toe, one for the hip. And instead of looking at the body like a system that needs different inputs at different times, I could simply go to an Ayurvedic doctor, which is essentially, if they're worth their salt, an engineer of the human body. And they understand, just like these ancient people understood, that the body is a system that needs these different inputs at these different times, right time, right thing, right time, right input, right place, right person. And what they understand is that everything is a reflection of everything else. So just like those 3 principles, all the herbs that we take represent and are part of, weaved into those principles. And so if our body, for example, my metabolism is too high, that's the fire element, one out of those 3 elements. The secret actually is conversion. The secret is symbolism. The secret is this energy that is inside of the structure of that cobweb. And so we see the web, but we don't see what created the web. We don't see the underlying subtle essence of that, but we do, and we are able to match patterns. And so one of these patterns, the secret element of conversion, is found inside of all of my cells and inside of the neurons as well, and also inside of my herbs. If my conversion is too high, then what do I need? Well, maybe I need something different than you do. Maybe I need peppermint, because peppermint's higher in transport, it's higher in the air quality. air element. If I have a lot of fire, it's just like an engine. Let's say I have an engine in front of me and it's giving off all this heat. So the conversion is really high, but the gas or something in there isn't transporting that heat. Then it's all going to get stored up, backed up, and the engine's going to crash. And so the same thing happens inside of all of our bodies.
Okay, so that's really interesting, man. Thank you for sharing that. I want to just go back to fruits for a moment, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
So, like, I understand, like, dry fruit is like something that is more prominent towards the regimen, but is it mainly because it, like we were talking about, because wet fruit takes up the space, so we lose more nutrients because of we're taking up more space with the wet fruit, or is it just because something with dry fruit is superior to wet fruit?
Yeah, two things. So one of them is less water means more food. More food can equate to more nutrients. So anytime we take in something dried, particularly something dried with low calories, let's say cacao, we're able to get in more L-arginine than if we were eating fresh cacao. So that's the first part, which is more bang for your buck. We're getting more nutrients because it's taking up less space and we're able to get more of that quality in. The second one is the fermentation thing is useful. It's simply useful to know that. It's useful to know that if I combine wet fruit together with something heavier, then, and heavy food is ideal for me, being that I love potatoes, I love rice and beans. These are complete proteins. And being that I would want to prioritize those foods, especially because they provide me satiety, then I naturally am just going to lean away from wet fruit because it doesn't give me that same satiety feeling. And how has satiety emerged? Satiety emerges inside of the human mechanism in response to energy density, in response to nutrient density. So the denser the nutrients are in there, the less hungry we're going to feel, which is why when the body starts to release ketones, it realizes, oh, I don't need so many nutrients. I have energy. These two things in combination will naturally relieve hunger. And so there's that's the second part. And the third one is dried fruit. Is something that I enjoy a lot. I had it yesterday. It's high inside of the third element that we've yet to discuss. So we talked about the first two. We talked about transport. We talked about conversion. And the third one, these are also things that you learn inside of. It would take you 3-4 years to discuss what we just went over in 5 minutes, and you wouldn't be sure what you learned.
Holy shit.
Third element is kapha, also known as earth and water, also known
Sorry, could you repeat that? That sounded so cool.
Yeah, kapha, earth and water. That's K-A-P-H-A. They talk about this in Ayurvedic science, but we can also explain this inside of American engineering terminology, which is, it just means structure or storage. So the body has transport, it has conversion, and it has structure and storage. And structure and storage, some foods are naturally higher in that. If our bodies are really high in conversion, our metabolism is going off the charts, then foods that are very useful to me or you would be foods that are high in kapha. So there are some days, for example, if I have a lot of spices today, then my conversion is going to be very high. And I might love some oatmeal, or I might love some dried fruit, even though in my opinion, if I eat too much of those combined, they give me quite a bit of gas. So some cinnamon as an input would be useful because cinnamon is high in what? It's high in transport. And also balances out pizza, the second one, conversion.
Yeah, man, like that's another thing too, the cinnamon, holy shit. That, like, I can't explain how much that changes everything. Like, it's so fucking ridiculous. You got some in there right now? Nice. Yeah, man, like the first thing in the morning is like I'll have my tea with a bit of cinnamon, a bit of nutmeg with some I was talking to Andriy, and now I have like a green tea extract in there as well. But like, yeah, but like, man, like just after, like right in the morning, like, you know, I'll take a nice cold shower. I'll have like a little bit of like, you know, you wake up in the morning, so you burp a little bit, at least I do. The moment I have that tea, I'm not burping for the rest of the fucking day. And I'm just sitting there, I'm like, this actually works. But and now that you just explained it, now like it finally like clicks and makes sense to me. Like, now that it transports and everything, because before I'm like, okay, this works, but I'm not understanding the mechanism of what it's doing, of how it's working. I just know it works. And it was bothering me that it's like, I don't understand the mechanism. And that's another thing. I get pretty critical, like, so I can understand I annoy people sometimes because like I want to know, but I specifically want to know how it works, like why
Yeah.
it does it.
Yeah, no,
So,
same, man. I mean, you know this about me probably, that education means a lot to me because I've had that same yearning. I always felt like I was being miseducated, and as it turns out, I was right. You know,
mhm,
we can talk about elites or names and da, but I don't want to get lost in that. What I do want to mention though is that the structure of the education that was introduced to me and even introduced to you was meant for people to be jobs, to be complacent and not to understand systems. They were
yep,
meant to understand specific tasks and do the tasks without understanding the underlying mechanisms, not to learn
yeah,
how to do something like as simple as taxes, not to learn how
mhm,
to make your own money if you needed to, not to learn how
yeah,
to farm, agriculture. These are all important skills that I want to impart to the world because I felt so deeply deprived of them. So the doctor was my introduction to that. Oh, that's possible. Opened up my perspective. But now it's my turn. It's my turn to lead my life.
yes, I completely agree with that. The doctor really just opened that. It's like, you don't got to live like this. Let me show you another way of living. Let me show you what is possible if you achieve the discipline and everything. And I
And
agree. Like, sorry.
I'll tell you something also. I've always, until recently, I've continued, and he is an individual. And every time me and him have talked, either in voice call or otherwise, or Zoom call like this, he's continued to repeat that my evolution, that he doesn't encourage it in any particular direction, that it's up to me. But what I
Yeah.
keep finding is that he is in alignment with universal principles through and through to the greatest extent possible. He has his private life where he's made his own specific situation specific choices, of course, the
Mhm.
military, etc. But these principles, what he's created with air, and I think this is also where the name the architecton comes out, because it's meant to make that distinction between the architecton is what arches everything together, and
Ah,
Nun Savasiva is more of his personal endeavor and his own endeavor to godliness, so to speak, within himself. But he makes that distinction because the architecton is there for a particular purpose, and that is to bridge together the universe. It has more to do with these universal principles that me and you were discussing than it does have to
mhm.
do with his private life. And so as I
Okay.
learn more and more about these principles, and those three elements turn into five elements, and we know, for example, in the book of Five Rings, that these five elements are discussed, and we know that throughout the world, these five elements are discussed. And those five elements have to do with the word Amen, Aumen. The U is silent. Why is it Amen? Because the U is that secret we just talked about. Ooh, the
Mhm.
heart, conversion, fire, pita. It's always a secret. That's why it doesn't seem to be shown. And so when we're learning Amenism, even the philosophy that backs Amenism, is very simple. All it is developing psychic power to be able to let go of attachments when necessary.
Mhm.
Enlightened asceticism is the cure for the future. Is it for everyone? No, he makes it very clear that his ideas are only for those who are able to digest them. And simultaneously, in understanding systems, I would have created it my own. Like I would have come to this.
Mhm.
It would have taken me another 20, 30 years, but I myself would have created some appellation of the architecton to bridge together these universal principles in alignment with a diet, because everything is connected. And this is obviously not a diet. The diet is just a
Mhm.
symbolic element. It's just that secret underlying fire element. And
Mhm.
it's in such alignment with so much of the beautiful work that he's done. And he saved all of us a lot of time.
Yes, he has.
All of us are on this journey. And as we become more in alignment to the universal principles, as is naturally our nature, as being masculine things, we empirically want to understand the reality and the world. He's naturally put us in a certain foothold to have the foundation,
Mhm.
um, the kapha, the water and earth. We naturally have that foundation in order to give ourselves our own fire and our own conversion inside of our particular situation specific lives, and to learn these principles, and not only to learn them but to discover them in ourselves through the void.
Mhm. I love that, man. I love that. I love that a lot, actually. And I just had a fucking question I was saving to ask you, and it just escaped my head because of just how beautiful, like everything you were just saying.
It means
God
the
damn it.
world.
Sorry, there we go. Now I got it back. Perfect. Sorry. So, like, See, that's what I mean. I get so distracted by what sometimes of like what you said. I just get into it, and then I'm like, oh crap, there goes my question. But I just got it back, thank God. So throughout this practice and everything, I'm just curious because clearly I'm only a naive 29-year-old. I still won't know the answers until I guess I reach that age. Do you feel like what we're doing is actually going to extend our lives? Like, so what I mean by that, so instead of like living to like 90, we'll actually like reach like 120, or is it just going to enhance our quality of life? So we'd still perish at like 90 or whatever age, but our quality of life is enhanced. So like we're not like a fragile like 90-year-old. We're actually like a functional, maintained 90-year-old instead of like actually having our bodies, our lives extended.
Yeah, that functional, not that functional 90-year-old you just mentioned wouldn't have a reason to die at 90.
Mhm. Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. I'll just
You see, so
another thing that happens to me when I meditate a lot is I always catch myself, either it's with myself or I still haven't decided yet if it's either just, anyways, I just know that there's two voices that I argue with, and one of them is myself, and it just goes to, it's like, is what I just thought about real, or is this just something I'm coming up with to reinforce what I want to believe? So that's why I like to ask you questions like that, just to see if it's like, am I getting in my own way, or is this something that is actually possible?
yeah, I would say both happen consistently within all of
Mhm,
us, and that we're meant to bring synchronicity to that balance of chaos and order. The chaos
mhm,
is something we don't always identify with, but the order we do. We identified with the ordered and the structured, and we don't always identify with the symbolic.
exactly. Yeah. It's always, oh man, is that a battle on a regular basis? So sometimes I'll just catch myself like, what the hell am I doing? Like, why was I doing that? And I have to like calmly bring myself back into place. But I only notice that ever happens if like I eat something that I
Sure.
shouldn't. There is moments of weakness within my 1 hour window. My little sister would be like, "Oh, well, like I have an Oreo or something. If you want to like try it, you haven't ate one in like 8 months," and you're like, "It's like, yeah, I'll have just one in them." But that does that. I don't want to say like does that do damage, but it does, like the sugar from that or whatever is in it. Like I'll wake up the next day and I'll notice I'm not as disciplined, and I'll be sitting there. I'm
Yeah.
like, it's just a
Yeah.
fucking Oreo cookie. Like it was just one
So,
freaking cookie.
yep. So imagine that this cobweb that is my experience. Imagine that I'm
Mhm,
pulling together several threads of existence at once. So it's not just a two-dimensional cobweb, but a
mhm,
five-dimensional cobweb. And so I'm pulling together several dimensions at once into this one singularity. And the way that it all operates as a singularity is if all the cells, all these different points on the cobweb are in synchronicity. And
mhm.
so if I take something that, let's say it's a little bit, I'm using this word acidic, not in the usual way that we would think about it,
Yeah.
like vitamin C, but I'm using it in a different way as something that corrodes that cobweb, something that corrodes that structure, just a little teeny bit, something that would
Mhm,
corrode the myelin sheath on the neurons, for example, like
mhm,
MDMA can do. And I've had this experience. It can corrode the myelin sheath on the neurons, like a copper wiring, like the rubber
mhm,
across the copper wiring. And when that happens, then the electrical currents are shooting out in different directions. So this cobweb, instead of being aligned inside of a cosmic way that it's holding everything together to the epicenter, all of a sudden it might be branching out into certain places like a tree. If it branches out too much in the wrong direction, the whole damn thing could fall over. And so
mhm,
in the same way, when we take in certain inputs into this body, into this system that corrode that foundation, that don't have alignment with our system, it's the wrong input at the wrong time for the wrong person. And when we do this, then it creates those things more likely to happen. That branch is more likely to tilt a little bit more to the left the next day. And in doing that, that sense of imbalance is likely to create a chain reaction of more imbalances.
mhm. I like that. I like that, especially how you brought up like just, I haven't tried MDMA myself, but I've noticed whenever I do mushrooms or like acid on this regimen, the next day it is so hard to be disciplined to like I'm really glad that I just do not eat flesh at all. But my buddies and like when we're traveling back, they'll go to like like a restaurant, and I'll sit there like just drinking water, but I notice how weak my will is to almost be tempted to just like eat flesh or like eat something there, because the body or the mind is just like, even though I'm aware that I'm okay and I don't need it, the mind, since it's so drained from the psychedelics, it's like, eat that. I need energy. And I feel like that's just the brain being selfish because it wants energy. So it wants to just take any kind of nutrients it wants, which
Yeah,
would probably be more damaging.
yeah, two questions. One of them, do you take in the elixir, the amino elixir?
I do take the almond after. Oh, sorry, like after I've done psychedelics or before psychedelics. Like before, like I've done the psychedelics and everything. Like I do it within my 1 hour window. So like I'll have the elixir and everything. I'll eat my meal, and then I'd eat like the mushrooms all afterwards. And I've just found that's how it works for me. Or like I'll have the
So,
acid
so,
afterwards.
so
I
you're
just try to.
so you're talking about pretty late then.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
When I used to, so I'll give you some feedback. Few years ago, I used to use very high doses of psilocybin cubensis, the
Oh
mushroom, the very
wow.
common mushroom. And I say very high, even though I know that there are higher inside of certain traditions. I used to take 5 to 7 grams once a week,
Nice.
on a Sunday. And I used to wake up early, sometimes 4 in the morning. This is when I first started the regimen as well. I had many addictive tendencies, and this was one of the things that helped me with that. And I had been studying it since I was 17, so I was very aware of the safety to it. However, you can abuse anything. And that what I
Yes.
did was I didn't abuse the substance as much as I just abused my body in general. I was working 4 jobs in a very short amount of time.
Jesus.
I went to being very non-athletic to trying to be hyper athletic. And I just was constantly trying to study and keep my brain involved. And there was this imprint in me that just didn't want to resort or revert back to the image I had of myself before. I wanted to make this transformation, and I wanted to burn it all the way through. I had a hold of that secret of conversion. For the first time, I tasted a little bit of this fire, and I didn't want to let it go. And so there was several inputs that I took in, and one of the inputs that I realized was I was better at being more disciplined, better at if I just blew my mind in a sense where if I had this experience once a week, this 5 to 7 gram experience, and just sang and beat my chest and ran around and did the exercise, and I just purified my body. Now I know this is Kriya yoga, but I didn't know any of that then. I was just discovering my own thing. Kriya, the word the word Kriya, there's a little bit of honey bush in my throat. The word Kriya simply means purification. The reason why we purify our bodies and our minds is because we naturally are in alignment with God. We naturally are God. And so we purify everything that isn't in alignment with that. And we naturally feel the resonance of God vibrate through us when we're in that purification. So there are 5 types of yoga, which are again in alignment to Amen, and in alignment to the 5 elements, and in alignment to the 5 brain waves, the primary brain states that we go into, and so on. So that number 5 is very important. Now, when I was waking up at this time, 4 in the morning, and I was doing this consistently, my nerves, that cobweb, started to corrode. It was too much pressure, too much light for that cobweb at one time. And psilocybin cubensis is the only one.
Sorry.
Psilocybin cubensis was the only one that I found to be safe, and I could take at the doses that I was intending to take for that experience. And when I tried LSD, for example, I had only done it 3-4 times total. I realized that there was a fragmentary type of experience associated to that. It wasn't actually bringing me closer together to anything or making me more spiritual or anything like that. People, I was often offbeat. I would talk too fast. I would go off the wrong threads, things like this. But after my psilocybin experiences, I always came back. People liked me more. So there was an empirical study with that in my relationships with the people around me associated to that. And that's also when I was experimenting and really delving into authenticity and just trying my best and dying on my own sword, so to speak. And so that was an input that I took a few years ago, and I haven't really used that since. But in the beginning, when I was trying to initiate these disciplines of the Yaman protocol, it was something that really helped me. But I did it in the morning. So you talk about doing it after your meal. These things could be very stimulatory, even though psilocybin has a relationship to theta state, my favorite state. I know people talk a lot about gamma, but theta state seems to be one of my favorite ones because it has an association to the void, or which is the space where we can get information from the infinite waters of noon.
Yes, I like how you call it the void, because I honestly still haven't come up with a word for it. And some of my friends, they're just like, when we're all on mushrooms and everything, they start asking me these questions. They're like, how are you in this mind state? Like, how are you functioning? And I'm like, man, it's just your awareness. I tell them, I'm like, just sit there, become aware, start listening to yourself. Like, I told them, it's like, it almost feels like a primal instinct almost, but you're getting like all this knowledge. It's like, I tell them, it's like, instead of just being aware of what's going on in your body, just be aware of what's going around you as well. Like, they're too focused on like the shrooms digesting to actually get the beauty of like what the mind is experiencing, looking at the sky. Like, I almost bring into tears of how involved I am with the fucking sky. Like, when I look at it, and when I'm off the trip, sometimes I'm like, why can't I be that involved with life when I'm sober? So sometimes, like, even through meditation, I'm like, why can't I capture that? Like, I don't know. I just find my involvement when I'm on psychedelics is so beautiful and pure that I can't capture that.
And my journey for the past 4 years have been exactly that. To how can I have this all the time? How can I be more involved with life? Because I looked at the doctor. This was not someone who was using psychedelic substances, but he embodied this sort of void, this sort of essence that I wanted some of that. I saw the look in his eyes, and I had enough identification with that feeling experience to know that he had it and he was carrying it with him. And so what he's able to do is what the yogis talk about, to have this experience, to be totally, let's say, for example, intoxicated, even though that word can be, it can be misinterpreted, but totally alert, totally aware, totally grounded and connected to life and aware and perceptive. And so that's been my journey for the past 4 years, and why I even delved into what they call yoga. Yoga is, again, a discovery. It's not something that the Indians came up with. It's something they found. And I would say the same thing about these aruaha, or any of these standing postures, the lying down postures. Some people, they like to say, for example, that people copy movement. That it's like, oh, you copied my choreography. And to the extent that's true, and it can be true to practical purposes, but to a large extent, it's not. To a large extent, you can't copy someone's movement.
It's true.
You discover movement. Movement is an expression of the body. We've had this body for millions of years. There is nothing that's not been done with this body. And so if we can simply tap into that movement, tap into the complicated structures that would naturally emerge from this cobweb, then I can be more dynamic in all sorts of ways in my life. So in the morning, I would take that dose and I would just spend all my time at the park or in the beach. You talked about being brought to tears. I would cry for hours and just let everything go, and just use my body and all the nervous energy in my body, and just shake and dance and do everything I could just to move. At the end of the day, I wanted to be done. We talked about, I took those principles really to the edge. And you know this about me. Everyone knows this about me inside of the group. My nervous system was fried for like 2-3 years, and I gave myself tendonitis at 21 years old. Everyone in the group knows that about me by now, because I've asked so many questions over the past few years involving that. And it's only really between this year and last year, that I sort of found some balance and consistency, and sort of, it took some time to heal. And that's just what it is, time. And so I learned how to be an ascetic through pain. And I guess that would be the way, if there is a way. But I would take those experiences in the morning, and I would just, at the end of the day, I wanted to be done. I wanted the fatigue to be at that level, because he talked about exercising until you were at that level, but I didn't know how to rest. I didn't know what that looked like, because I didn't know what exercise looked like, you see? So I jumped into the deep end of the pool. And it gave me, broke down my body, because if you've never swam before and suddenly you jump into the deep end of the pool, you're probably going to be choking for a while. And so,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I took in more water than expected, and I didn't grow lungs, or I didn't grow gills. So because that doesn't happen with the body. But what I did do is I learned how to float, and now I float above the waters, and sometimes I like to take a deep dive, but at least at this point I am consistently just balancing a midway of control and learning more and more as time goes on, forever a student. And to be a good teacher, I believe that it's necessary for me to be a good student to myself.
Yes, I agree with that. That was very well put, brother. Very well put. Especially going back to the pain part, I agree. Like, as I've told you, and I've told some other people in the group, like I don't mind sharing this, but I've had some people in the group message me about this, about cocaine addiction. Like, I used to be addicted for a decade. I burnt a hole literally through my nose to the point where, like, people can't see it, but if you would ever look through my nose, you could clearly see the other side. And that pain, that shame almost, because pain, I've learned, if you embrace pain, you learn so much about yourself. You'll learn so quickly about who you are if you can embrace pain and sit there. But I've also learned too that what's even harder than embracing pain is admitting your shame, admitting what you're ashamed of. Some of the things that you find so hard to even say out loud that you wouldn't even be able to say to a person. And I found that was so hard to overcome. And finally overcoming that, one of the ways I finally did that was through his practice. Because once I started actually giving myself better information in my gut and actually started becoming like a better version of myself, I was able to actually have that catharsis and let go of all that shame. And man, like, even talking about it now, it's like the body is getting like this emotional reaction where before it used to bring me to tears and I wouldn't want to talk to anybody. But it's like now it's just like the body being like, remember this shame? Now look at how it's not bothering you anymore. But it's still there. The body still feels the past, like the shames and pains from the past, but it's, instead of it being something that's actually destroyed me, it's just the body letting me know, it's like, you can get past this, just breathe, expand a little bit, and you see it goes away. But it's always, the body always remembers, which is always so interesting to me, that it can remember past emotions or experiences that bring back that shame or pain. And it's like, before I like lose track of where I'm going, it's like, if you're really able to be one with that and love that instead of being attached to it. My mother is Buddhist, and one of the most beautiful things she's ever told me, she was like, son, do you know the difference between love and attachment? And I'm like, what is the difference? She's like, when you're attached to something, you'll make an excuse. It's constricted. You won't let go because you always make an excuse for it. But love, you let everything flow free. You can let it go and it can come back no matter what you do. So always love back. And just with her saying that, at that moment, I was like, just love yourself, forgive yourself. Don't be attached to this shame, to this pain. And through that, I just found so much clarity, so much love for myself, so much love for the world. And now I just try to see people from the perception of love. Because when you see people from the perception of love, they don't have to do shit. You just love them for who they are. You just like them for who they are. And if somebody's like, what's an example of a perception of love? I'm like, when you have a pet and they do something stupid and you love them for it, you just see it. That is the perception of love. You love that person for everything they do. You love life for everything it does, their flaws, everything that they do. That, just love it. The world is going to hurt you. Just love it back. That's what I try to do, at least.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that with me, brother.
Oh, anytime, brother. Brother, you're one of the most souled people I've ever met. And I don't know if soul is the right word, but your openness, I'll use openness instead. I radiate with that so much. Like, your openness, like every time you chat, it illuminates the chat. Like even when you're typing, it's like you can feel just this level of openness that just illuminates it all. And it's so beautiful. It's like, I'm so glad I've met you, because it helps me become more open. It helps me, like, I like this quote I have: strong opinions held loosely. So some of the things you say just challenges it. And I was like, you know what? What he's saying is actually a lot more informative and a lot better of a perspective than how I was seeing it. So let's drop this and let's absorb his perception and let's see if this works with me. So that's what I just try to do. I always try to just take a little bit from everybody else. And then throughout my life, I found throughout trial and error, right? Try it, see if it works. If it doesn't, well, at least you learn that it's not something for you. But with that, brother, it's going to be 6:30. I need to get this workout in before I decide to find another way not to. So thank you so much for this chat and everything. And I hope I can get some of this recording, because this was, I don't even know how long we went on for, but this was so fucking like, it's like you said, I learned more about fucking, like, I just learned more about nutrition and life than I would going to college and paying like $30,000 for like 9-hour courses. You know what I mean? So thank you for that. I hope we can have another conversation soon. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, me too, brother. Thank you for this time and this space.
Thank you. Have a nice rest of your evening, brother.
You too, brother. Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.